Can you send me a picture of your body? My husband has an 11-year-old sister, Flavia, who is much younger than him. I knew that my husband was very protective of her, but when I saw the exchange of messages, I got chills. My husband had asked his sister for images of her body and was rejected as disgusting. My husband then wanted to take time off work to go back to his parents' house to celebrate his sister's birthday. When I went with him out of concern for his sister's well-being, he said something outrageous. "Do you want to take a bath with me? I'll wash you." What are you talking about? You're at an age now you should bathe separately. I was scared of Glenn, who said it with a laugh, and I hurriedly shouted to him, but Flavia, who had been sitting down, stood up quickly and began to prepare for her bath. I was appalled to see Flavia return with a change of clothes in her hand, without any sign of reluctance. Flavia looked up at her husband and said, "I want my brother to see it." When my in-laws heard what she said, they became furious. My husband, however, did not seem to care but pulled his sister into a hug and suddenly took off her shirt. The next moment, I saw the expression on my husband's face and my sister's. I understood everything and ran out in front of my parents-in-law, who furiously tried to pull my husband and sister off. My name is Vanessa. I have loved bread since I was a child, and my love for it led me to vocational schooling. Then I have been working in a bakery since graduation. I love my current workplace, where I can work surrounded by the fragrant smell of freshly baked bread. I started dating the bakery manager, Glenn, when I was still a part-time worker. Glenn, who is 3 years older than me, is a young man who was favored by the elderly couple who preceded him in this bakery and became the manager and owner at the same time as they retired. Glenn is a warm-hearted person and is loved by the elderly and children. Glenn is dexterous, and on his days off from the bakery, he likes to perform street performances at local kindergartens and nursery schools. He says whether it's delicious bread or fun street art, the best thing is that I can make people smile. Especially when I see children smiling, it cheers me up. Glenn is a truly gentle man who smiles like that, and I really respected him. That is why, when Glenn asked me to marry him, I was able to accept without hesitation. Glenn is a lovely person and I have nothing to complain about him, but no one is perfect, and in Shinichi's case, his relationship with his parents was not good. Glenn is actually the child of a rich family, and my father-in-law is the director of a large hospital. His father-in-law and Glenn did not get on particularly well, and when Glenn did not go on to medical school, the disagreement became so definitive that he was declared disowned. Just because I'm getting married, I don't need to go all the way to those parents to say hello. They only judge people by their education and whether or not they have a medical license. Still, I still think you should say hello to them at least once. You might have a bad feeling about it, but you are definitely Glenn's father and mother. Besides, you wouldn't want them to mess things up later on. Glenn was terribly reluctant to go to his parents-in-law to greet the marriage, but he did not want to get into any trouble later on. After my persuasion, Glenn agreed to go to his parents-in-law's house to say hello. I visited my in-laws' home with Glenn, who was nostalgic for his hometown. However, despite what I had heard from Glenn, I realized that I had underestimated the humanity of my in-laws. I'm home. Glenn, you're really back. Don't expect me to congratulate you just because you're getting married. It's a disgrace to my family just because you're my son. I was appalled when my mother-in-law said this to me at first, but Glenn looked at me as if nothing had happened and looked for his father-in-law. For Glenn, it was a daily occurrence for his mother to say this to him. In fact, my mother-in-law was his father's second wife, and not Glenn's real mother. It seems that her attitude towards Glenn was cold from the start, perhaps because he was not her own biological child. As I caught a glimpse of this and felt my heart ache, my father-in-law appeared from the back room with a grim look on his face. "What are you losers in life doing here now? I wouldn't lend you money." "I didn't come here to beg for money. I told you I'm getting married and I'm going to say hello." "I don't care. You came here to do such an unnecessary thing." My father-in-law sat down on the sofa with a bored look on his face, spread out the newspaper and did not even look at me or Glenn. Violet, the housekeeper who had greeted me at the door, appeared with a tray of tea, but my mother-in-law glared at her. "You're wasting tea leaves. They'll be leaving soon, so put it down." "I'm sorry." Violet looked flustered at my mother-in-law's cold voice as she walked away. Glenn gave a small sigh and told his parents in the awkward atmosphere at the drawing room that he would leave after greeting Flavia and went out into the corridor. Following him, Glenn heads down the corridor to the back room. Flavia is Glenn's much younger sister. Flavia is Glenn's half-sister and is only 11 years old and in the 5th grade. Perhaps because she is more than 12 years older than him, Glenn says he is very protective of Flavia. Since she was a little girl, Flavia has also been a great admirer of Glenn. When he visited Flavia's room, Glenn knocked and called her inside. After a while, Flavia appeared, and when she saw Glenn, she rolled her eyes and immediately averted her gaze. "Big brother, long time no see." "Flavia, it's been a long time. How have you been?" "Nothing. I'm getting married. This woman is my wife. I'd be happy if you get on well with her." "Nice to meet you, Flavia. I'm Vanessa." When Glenn and I talked to her with a smile, she was looking down without making eye contact. The impression was quite different from what I had heard. While I was wondering, I heard footsteps approaching in the corridor. When I turned around, standing there was my mother-in-law, who looked like a demon. "Please don't talk for a long time. How will you take responsibility if your stupidity gets into Flavia? We haven't seen each other in a while, so it's okay to talk a little." "Hey, Flavia?" "Well, of course it's no good. Flavia, study in your room. You can't just go out of your room without permission." Flavia, who was told strictly, nodded without saying anything and shut the door of her room. The awkward visit to my in-laws' house came to an end, and I apologized to Glenn. "I'm sorry, Glenn. I didn't expect your father-in-law and mother-in-law are such terrible people." "It's okay. What Vanessa said was right, and I don't about their attitude. However, I was worried about Flavia." "Flavia, she was not quite what I expected. I thought she would be more cheerful." "Well, I guess Flavia is a difficult age now. She didn't used to be such a girl." Glenn smiled bitterly, looking a little sad, but Flavia was still strange, and Glenn also began to act a little strange from that day. After the visit to my in-laws' house, messages from Flavia started arriving on Glenn's phone. Glenn and I had no qualms at all about looking at each other's phones, and sometimes we used the other's phone to use a subscribe that only the other person was using. As usual, at the time when Glenn was leaving his phone unattended, I was about to use Glenn's phone to watch a video. Then I received a message from Flavia. I opened the app on the spur of the moment and happened to see the Talk app and realized that Glenn frequently exchanged messages with Flavia. I asked Glenn whether he and Flavia were exchanging messages, but he did not elaborate. I was curious, so I secretly started peeping at the messages exchanged with Flavia on Glenn's Talk app using a method that prevents the messages from being read. One day, while Glenn was taking a bath, I borrowed Glenn's phone and checked the messages between him and Flavia and found a shocking text. In it, Glenn asked Flavia, "Can you send me a picture of your body?" The text included a request from Shinichi to his younger sister for a picture of her body. What do you mean? My mind goes blank for a moment and my heart starts to beat at an uncomfortable pace. With trembling fingers and the sensation of cold sweat, I checked Flavia's reply, and there I received a sentence refusing to send the image, saying that it was disgusting. Upset, I put Glenn's phone back in its original place and desperately tried to keep my composure. No matter what I think, the content of the text message is too unusual. I asked him fearfully as I watched Glenn drinking water after coming out of the bath. "Well, are you still communicating with Flavia?" "Why?" "Well, when I met her for the first time, I was a bit concerned about her behavior, so I wondered how it was going." "What kind of communication do you have with her? Do you get on well with each other through messages?" Yeah, we're exchanging messages, but just pointless normal messages. Don't worry about it." Glenn is laughing and fooling around, which makes me nervous. For a moment, I feel as if Glenn's eyes are swimming. If Glenn has such tastes, then maybe the street performances he showed at kindergartens and nursery schools were just an act to satisfy his own desires. I was incredibly scared when I thought that the kindness I had seen in Glenn was a lie. After that, he stopped receiving messages from Flavia. I don't know if this was the cause, but Glenn, who was always so kind to me, began to show a fidgety and restless attitude, making scary faces and clicking his tongue in ways I had never heard before. As I grew more and more anxious, one day Glenn said to me, "Flavia's birthday is coming soon. I'm thinking of taking that day off from the shop and going to celebrate Flavia's 11th birthday." "Eh? We haven't done that before, have we?" "This year is special." If it were the milestone's age, I could understand his special treatment, but I think that 11th birthday isn't enough to give a special celebration. I knew the exchange between Glenn and Flavia, so when I heard that Glenn will take a day off and go all the way to see Flavia, I began to worry about her. "But won't they say terrible things to you if you go to that house?" "I know my father and mother won't welcome me there, but I still want to go there to give Flavia a present." "I understand. Then, can I come too?" "Vanessa too. Why?" "I also wanted to get to know Flavia better." Glenn agreed with me, and the two of us went to my parents-in-law's house on Flavia's birthday together. We knew that if we told my parents-in-law beforehand, they would treat us badly, so we visited them without refusal. The person who greeted us at the door was Violet, the housekeeper, and she welcomed me and Glenn with a smile. However, my parents-in-law naturally did not welcome our visit. "What are you guys doing here? Today is Flavia's birthday. You know it's not a day for losers in life like you to defile our home. This is why I hate idiots. The way that you come here without asking and can't even think about people's feelings shows that you don't pay attention to others on a regular basis. You can leave now." Glenn, who didn't seem to see his glaring parents-in-law, went to the prone Flavia and handed her a present and asked her how she was feeling. The awkward time has been going on for a long time, but Glenn doesn't show any sign of leaving even after dinner is over. On the contrary, he said something a little surprising: "I'm going to take a bath today and then go home." Even more surprisingly, Glenn looked back at Flavia and said, Do you want to come in with me, Flavia? I'll wash your body for you. What are you talking about? You're at an age now you should go in separately. I was scared of Glenn, who said it with a laugh, and I hurriedly shouted to him, but Flavia, who had been sitting down, stood up quickly and began to prepare for the bath. I was appalled to see Flavia return with a change of clothes in her hand, without any sign of reluctance. Flavia looked up at Glenn and said, "I want my brother to watch my back." Glenn's eyes widened for a moment at Flavia's words, but they soon narrowed gently. Flavia looked at Glenn with pleading eyes. While I was unable to say anything, it was my parents-in-law who stood up. What an unhealthy thing to say. How old do you think Flavia is? I don't feel good. If you want to go in alone. The parents-in-law looked furious, but for some reason their eyes were wandering this way and that, and their voices were trembling with dismay. Glenn glared at his parents and then hugged Flavia. In front of me, not understanding what is happening, Glenn suddenly removes Flavia's shirt, saying in a low voice, "Now I'm sure." "Oh, hey, what are you doing?" "Flavia, get away from such a man right now." Their anger heated up and they jumped at Glenn, trying to pull Glenn off Flavia. However, I sensed Glenn's intention and moved them away by splitting my body between my parents-in-law and Glenn. "Please don't. You're the ones who should be leaving. You're strangers, what are you talking about? A fool's wife is still a fool. Why should we be kept away in this situation?" Because I know that's what it was all about. Where I turned around, there were countless bruises and scrapes on Flavia's back. Some are new and some are in the process of healing, indicating that they were inflicted on a daily basis. Back scratches are not something you get every day, like a fall. I'd like to hear a satisfactory explanation for the scratches on your back. What do you mean, Father, Mother? The parents-in-law looked at each other and began to make excuses with a half smile. "Don't tell me you suspect we did it. We wouldn't do such a thing. It was probably done to her by friends at school. Yes, she can study well and has a pretty face, so other kids are jealous of her. You bottom feeders like you wouldn't understand." What my parents-in-law said was very hard to believe, but if they did it at school, that would be a big problem. "Flavia, did your friends at school really do this to you?" When I asked Flavia, looking into her eyes, she shook her head fearfully and gave her parents a frightened look. Patted her head by Glenn, she opened her mouth as if she had made up her mind. "My mom and dad used to beat me every day. I was told that my test score had to be 100. According to Flavia, her parents would get angry whenever she got a lower grade at school or cram school, or when they found out that there was another child who scored higher than Flavia in a test. "Flavia, I thought you were a bit clever, but I guess I didn't teach you enough. You have to become a doctor. Study harder, don't ever play with friends again. You skipped school, that's why you get these scores. You are really a capable child, so you shouldn't slack off. If you don't want to be hurt, you should study harder and harder." Flavia was chastised at every opportunity by her parents, who shouted at her like this. When Flavia revealed the truth, her parents turned blue. Glenn looks at his parents with disdain. The director of a major hospital is appalling to hear this. "Do you enjoy beating your own daughter? She's still in primary school." "I don't know anything. Flavia is lying. Don't listen to what children say." "No, where is the proof of our abuse? Flavia is just saying incomprehensible things because she's sick of studying. I am shushed by my parents-in-law, who deny it completely. I became worried that it was something that could be dealt with only by Flavia's testimony. But then a savior appeared. If it's evidence, I've got it. Listen to this. Violet, who was apparently listening to the conversation outside the room, had her phone in one hand. In front of the horrified parents-in-law, Violet operated her phone and played an audio. It was the voice of my parents-in-law hurting Flavia on a daily basis. What a score! Do you think you can become a doctor like this? You need to study harder. Papa, stop. It hurts. Don't you dare respond to me. Why are your test scores so low? Come here for a minute. I'm sorry, Mommy. Please stop. I'll definitely get a better score next time. The outburst made me want to cover my ears and Flavia's cries and screams. When I frowned at the painful recording, my father-in-law began to laugh hysterically. Ha ha ha. That voice won't necessarily be ours. Nonsense. I thought we would be in trouble if you say so, and there's a proper video too. Violet says so and now plays the video. In the face of evidence that could not be excused, Glenn began to tell the truth when his parents shut their mouths. Glenn had noticed that something was wrong with Flavia when he came to his parents' house to greet the marriage. He tried to talk to Flavia directly, but his mother interfered, so he asked Violet to let him know if anything happened to Flavia. Flavia was forbidden to have a smartphone on the grounds that it would get in the way of her concentrating on her studies. Violet took pity on Flavia and Glenn and lent her own phone to Flavia. All the messages from Flavia on Glenn's phone were sent from Violet's phone. However, when it came time for Flavia to send Glenn an image of her back taken through the mirror, her mother saw it at an inopportune moment. The mother-in-law realized that Glenn and Flavia were communicating, and in order to hide the fact of the abuse, she pretended to be Flavia and wrote back to Glenn saying that he was disgusting. The reason why Flavia stopped replying to him was not because she was disgusted with Glenn, but because her mother had become even more strict in monitoring her now that she had been discovered by her mother. Glenn became impatient at not being able to grasp Flavia's current situation and took the forced step of jumping in on the birthday celebrations, which he has done to this day. I knew Vanessa cared about her. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I didn't want Vanessa to worry about my people. I shake my head at Glenn, who smiles bitterly and addresses me. I was so ashamed of myself for doubting Glenn. Violet, if you betray us, you'll be fired. Do you understand? My father-in-law taunted Vanessa with bitterness, but she firmly retorted. Before I am a housekeeper, I am also a parent with children. I cannot allow this to happen. Violet's words sunk my parents-in-law. Afterwards, Glenn did not hesitate to report the case to the Child Guidance Center. The Child Guidance Center took the actual damage seriously and reported it to the police as well. Violet's hidden audio and video recordings became conclusive evidence, and my parents-in-law were arrested. Of course, the father-in-law was deprived of his title as the director of a major hospital. The in-laws' misdeeds were even reported in the press, and they were heavily bashed. Even if they were released, they would never get back what they were so proud of, and would never be able to return to their lives as before. When Violet quit the housekeeper, she had nowhere to go, so Glenn scouted for her to work at his bakery. Violet gladly accepted the offer and is now happily working at the bakery with us. Glenn and I decided to take Flavia under our wing. At first, Flavia was reserved and only studied as if she was frightened, but I invited her to various amusements. Up until now, Flavia had only studied under the strict supervision of her parents. Of course, studying is important, but the ability to enjoy life is also important. While watching films and dramas together, Flavia seems to have found something she likes. She has made friends at her new primary school and enjoys talking about her favorite actors and characters with them every day. Glenn is relieved to see that Flavia is now able to enjoy the pleasures of her age. He says she now has a dream. I want to take over my brother and Vanessa's bakery in the future. I want to be able to make better bread than my brother. Flavia, who said this with a bubbling smile, loves the bread that Glenn makes. Recently, she has started to try her hand at baking bread, just by watching and imitating. Flavia, who is naturally intelligent, is also enthusiastic about researching bread baking and has devised various ideas and even proposed a new menu item. I'll have to do my best to be the shop manager. Glenn is baking bread again today with a smile on his face. It was definitely Glenn who brought a smile to Flavia's face. My husband is someone I really respect from the bottom of my heart. Glenn and Flavia are here. That is the only thing that makes me feel that I can overcome any difficulties.